Welcome to Wellness Rebranded.
We know there is so much conflicting health and fitness advice out there.
And you're tired of the wellness fads, endless diets, and impossible standards that make you feel like nothing you do is ever enough.
You're ready to tune into your mind and body and feel empowered around health.
We're the healing trio here to help you redesign your relationships with food, fitness, and yourself.
I'm Elizabeth, registered dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor.
I'm Maria, licensed mental health therapist.
And I'm Tara, personal trainer.
Together, we're changing the narrative on health away from diet culture, hustle culture, and toxic positivity and towards healthful self-care.
So grab your water bottle, get ready to laugh, learn, and grow, and let's start rebranding your wellness journey.
So, hello, we have a super exciting episode of Wellness Rebranded for you today. If you have been listening for a while, you are likely familiar with intuitive eating because we talk about it almost every week. And today we have the founder of intuitive eating, Evelyn Tribole, is here with us. She created the 10 Principles 30 years ago with her partner, Elise Resch. We could not be more thrilled to have her with us. Evelyn is the author of 10 books, including co-author of the best-selling Intuitive Eating, a mind-body self-care eating framework, which has given rise to over 200 studies to date. Her newest book is Intuitive Eating for Every Day, 365 Inspirations and Practices. As an international speaker, Evelyn enjoys training health professionals on how to help their clients cultivate a healthy relationship with food, mind, and body through her process of intuitive eating. To date, there are over 2,600 certified intuitive eating counselors in 60 countries. The media often seeks Evelyn for her expertise, including the New York Times, CNN, NBC's Today Show, MSNBC, Fox News, USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, The Atlantic, Vogue, 10% Happier, and People magazine. Evelyn was the nutrition expert for Good Morning America and a national spokesperson for the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics for 6 years. Evelyn qualified for the Olympic trials in the first ever women's marathon in 1984. Although she no longer competes, she's a wicked ping pong player and avid hiker. And because I know you will want more of her when this conversation is over, you can connect with her on Instagram at Evelyn Tribole. So Evelyn, welcome. I just cannot overstate how excited we are to talk to you.
I'm thrilled to be here. I love talking about intuitive eating.
And let's be clear, excited is an understatement, Evelyn, because Elizabeth hasn't been able to sleep like the past weeks because we're having Evelyn on the show, right? Let's be honest.
We are just so honored and excited. And it doesn't say on your bio, but I also know that you are a very big surfer.
Yes.
I've never been so passionate about an activity. I've never worked so hard.
Need a cleaner home without the stress? Our partner Clean is a trusted cleaning service based in Anne Arundel County, serving homes and businesses across the DMV area. They do it all, from routine tidying to deep cleanings, move-in, move-out jobs, Airbnb turnovers, and janitorial services. Their team is experienced, reliable, and focused on giving you back time and peace in your space. And here's the best part. Mention Wellness Rebranded and you'll get $100 off your first cleaning. Visit chrisclean.com, that's KRISSKLEAN.com. Call 410-858-5620 and check the show notes for all the details.
So we're really excited to talk to you about so many things, but I thought that it would be interesting to start out. It feels like we're in a very unique moment culturally, and that diet culture, I think, is always shape-shifting, but certainly feels different even now, I think. And I would just love to get your perspective on what you think is perhaps different right now.
Well, I think what's really driving it is all of the attention on GLP-1s. I've never seen so much hoopla in the media go so uncriticized. You know, when I'm reading stories, I try and follow it, what's going on. There's very rarely a counterbalance in terms of the side effects and problems. In fact, as we speak, a new study just came out this week showing how people not only gained back the weight when they stopped the GLP-1s, they gained back even faster. And when they were interviewing physicians, their response is, well, they have to be, doing the right, exercise and diet and lifestyle. I'm thinking, this research is consistent across the board, what we see with weight loss studies. And so to gaslight the patients, like, you're not doing it good enough, I think is really problematic. And I think what makes this such a touchstone moment in culture is this kind of hoopla around the GLP-1s is really endorsing eating disorder behavior. That the behaviors that people experience while on these drugs often meet the criteria for atypical anorexia, if not anorexia per se. And so it's a lot that's going on. And it honestly, it drives me bonkers when I see celebrities talking effusively about their health journey. And when we start looking at the health impacts of these drugs on what they do, it's well known you lose about 40% of lean mass on these drugs. And what's not talked about is the lean mass not includes just muscle, it includes organ tissue, like your heart and your brain and your liver and your kidney. And there was a study just published looking at 500,000 patient records on these medications, 500,000 patient records. And of those taking GLP-1s, 20% had documented nutrient deficiencies. And those are the only ones we know about. Anyway, I'll get off you asked me a question that just got me more.
Just a lot of maybe nuance missing from the conversation and not a lot of attention on some of those potential risks. And I know as a fellow dietitian, I definitely worry about malnutrition and muscle loss and some of those studies. Tara and Maria, Evelyn is the biggest research guru I've ever known. She can cite every study, everything, and you are just so knowledgeable and well-versed.
Oh, thank you. I was just talking with Elise. She goes, Evelyn, I think you get a dopamine hit every time you read a study. I think you're right.
And you named them all right, if I remember.
I do give them names. Yeah.
Thinking about what you just shared, it's well known that we lose lean body mass, right? But I think most people don't think about losing organ mass. I work with a lot of people who do take GLP-1s, even though I take a weight neutral approach with my clients. And we work really hard to preserve the muscle mass. But is there anything that you can do to preserve the organ mass?
That's actually a good question. So here's what's really interesting. A lot of these studies, when they say you lose lean mass, they aren't measuring organ mass. I was looking for this information, so I came across a study where they looked at chronic calorie restrictors of 25% a day, and they compared them to those who weren't restricting. And what they saw is the restrictors had the organ mass loss criteria for having joint replacement, and a lot of them had severe malnutrition. So we have to look at this. It reminds me of the child's book, The Emperor Has No Clothes, only the kid can see it. It's like, we can see there's a problem with this. There's a huge problem, and there's a lot of money being made with this as well, which I think is in part the issue.
It feels like skinny is trending right now, but in 25 years, osteoporosis will be trending.
Yeah. And I think what's also another nuance with that trend is the waxing or the proliferation of body positivity seems like it's gone dormant, and what I say, it's not gone away. And actually, I'm a big endorser of body neutrality, that we don't have to be, proud of our bodies, but we can be neutral, that we don't identify it doesn't reflect who we are as a person and so on, our values and our character. So, yeah. We're living in complex times. We're living in complex times all around the world right now. It's wild. It's wild.
I'm just thinking, even from the emotional standpoint, we know that we're in a culture, a society that is like that immediate gratification. And this GLP-1 is some of that. You see the pictures of people losing weight, and they're portrayed now to have this change in their lives. And, it's like such a quick fix, if we call it that way, but not. And many times we just focus on looking at that, but not seeing what are the other sides and what are other things that I want to know before I make any decision. So a question for you is, if anybody listening right now feels that pressure of, maybe using GLP-1s, or they're already using it, what questions do you encourage them to maybe ask themselves before making that decision or before continuing using this?
I think that's such an important question. In fact, I think having complete informed consent is so important. It's not just saying yes, it's meaning I really understand all the ramifications. So I'd be looking at, what is your purpose for doing this? And let me also say, because I didn't state this, I have no issue with people taking GLP-1s for their blood sugar. And those are at much lower doses, by the way. So I'd be looking at what is your intention in terms of what's going to happen as a result of this. And when people say health, then because that's becoming code. Code is becoming health for weight loss. And weight loss or being at a certain weight has become code for health. When actually, when you look at all the research, that's actually not what we see. Having meaningful relationships, not being in loneliness or isolation, having enough sleep and so on, or there are many, many things. So I'd be looking at, are there some other ways that the thing that you're seeking that you can be getting that's not going to cause harm? I'm, all about, there's nothing wrong with pursuing health with something that's sustainable and not going to cause harm. And I would be looking at are you feeling any kind of pressure? Are you feeling pressure from your physician? Are you feeling pressure from family members? It really is disturbing to me. I've had patients whose doctors just say, oh, you should be on a GLP-1, not even asking them, do you want to hear about it? And so on and so on. I would be really curious about the cost of this. Is this something you can afford to do for the rest of your life? What happens if your insurance company stops paying for the part that it pays for? What happens if you're the one of 50 to 75% who don't tolerate the drug and get off of it within the first year? So there's a lot of assumptions being made. I'm going to go on this drug. I'm going to feel amazing. I'm going to look amazing. And it's like, but what if that's not your story? Can we slow down the decision process? I really do believe in agency. This is something you decide to do. It's something you decide to do. No shame. But let's make sure we've looked at all this. We've unpacked all this. What's going to happen? Because now what I'm starting to see happen, patients having to get off the drugs for a variety of reasons are now panicking because they're terrified of gaining weight, which reminds me again of what we see with the eating disorder patients, that they have this fear of weight gain. And society is cruel to people in bodies. That's all of us, Yeah.
Yeah. An unfortunate statement. So I think for many people, and, we try to have a lot of conversations about this, but I would love your perspective on it. It's so culturally wedded together, the idea of weight and health, that to sort of walk people through why it maybe isn't exactly what we've been led to believe and how to think about them differently. How do you help people have those conversations?
It really depends who I'm talking to. So if I'm talking to health professionals, like in the trainings, I'm going to be throwing out a lot of science. Cause I think it's important we look at that because that's what's being used. Science is being weaponized to say, oh, but health. So let's take a look for a minute and look at all the other things that can impact your health independent of weight. And let's look at all the studies that say health is dependent on weight. Most of the studies that show what your health is dependent on weight, they're not controlling for very important things. They're not controlling for childhood trauma, which is linked to the top 5 causes of death of chronic diseases. They often don't control for sleep. They don't control for social, all kinds of things. And so most of this research that's being touted has been on association or epidemiological studies. And there's a place for those kinds of studies. It helps to justify spending more money for doing an intervention study. But causation, association is not causation. It's just a link. And then when we start looking at, okay, well, what if we were to look at some of these other confounders by themselves? So, for example, a study which was published last year, oh my God, on I think about 400,000 people looking, in this case, they looked at BMI. They acknowledged BMI as a problem metric. But they said, let's look at it because it's being used as a measure of health and so much research. Let's look at this and look at fitness. And what they did across the board is looked at fitness and looked at BMI. And what they found is that if you had a level of fitness, it didn't matter what your BMI was. Your health outcomes, your mortality was fine. If you were in a lower BMI, but you weren't fit, you had more problems. And so they concluded that your BMI doesn't matter. It is the fitness issue. Then there's this really kind of well-known study. Oh my God, I'm forgetting the author's name, but it's like this loneliness study where she did a meta-analysis back in 2010 and looked at what is the impact of the quality of relationships on mortality, on death rates. So they looked at all these kinds of factors. They included an item for cigarette smoking and weight. And loneliness and isolation were the top leading indicator for all-cause mortality. Weight was way at the bottom, and even cigarettes was below this. So it's not this big thing that's being made out to be. Then when you take a look at the politics of this, in 2013, the American Medical Association, actually a little bit earlier, they asked their scientific task force this question: can we say, quote, obesity is a disease? And they did all the research, and they came back and said there's not enough data to support that idea. But the powers that be didn't like it. So they held it to a general vote, and they outvoted their scientific committee. And overnight, in 2013, obesity was considered a disease. And when you start looking at the fundings and the task force that came about with all of this, it's like you follow the money, you start to see part of that connection. But now it's become like this belief system. And so I think this is what makes it so hard for the individual, is we're not working just with the individual. We're working with the belief system of their parents, of their grandparents, generations before, and now with healthcare. And scientists and physicians are also subject to the cultural norms of the day. And there's kind of a well-known event that took place in the 17th century where this Dr. Semmelweis, saw these women dying all the time. And he thought, maybe if we washed our hands, we can prevent more deaths. And this was happening with all these surgeons. So he did this small study where they washed their hands, and sure enough, they lowered the death rate markedly. And this is before we knew about germ theory. And he presented the data, and he was laughed out of medicine. And this is at a time when physicians were proud to wear their bloody surgical garments because they meant, I'm a doctor. And they had this attitude of like, we're gentlemen, we don't need to wash our hands. And looking back, it's ridiculous. So now they named this Semmelweis reflex to explain what happens when new research comes along that challenges the most popular paradigm, that it's met with incredulity. And when you look back at science, like go back to Galileo, when he agreed that the Earth is not the center of the universe, he was put under house arrest for asserting that. So if we look throughout time, it's part of a pattern that we see that scientists and physicians are not immune from this kind of culture think,
Well, yeah, I think it's also important to say that, humans create research studies, right? And they play with their own biases and their own lens and that cultural belief system. So it's actually even built into the studies.
That's actually a really good point. In fact, so much of the research that I hand out, and people say, there's so much weight stigma. I go, I know. It's part, and I've had scientists send proposals to me on intuitive eating, because as I do it pro bono, I will give my feedback, and they'll often say with an apology, I'm so sorry, we had to include BMI as a metric in order to get the funding. We know it's incongruent with intuitive eating, but it's this game that is taking place, and so it's a big old problem.
And psychologically, how hard it is to change that belief system. We feel comfortable when we believe something and it gives us, lowers our anxiety.
Yeah.
That you're in a safe space. And then I'm like, oh, that wasn't true. I have to change it. So then you fight that too.
Well, one of the things I will do when I'm working with individuals, I'll say, let's step back for a moment and just look at what's the history of your body. What do you mean? Well, how many diets, by whatever name it goes by, keto lifestyle, points or whatever, what has been the impact when you've embarked on all these things? And it blows me away, because in the beginning, they'll say, oh, I lost all this weight. And then I went on vacation or then and they're blaming themselves. And I'll say, but let's look at the aftermath of this. What happened? What did your body show you? And usually, predictably, the weight comes back, and the weight that comes back is not the muscle tissue and organ tissue that was lost. It's fat that comes back, and it ratchets upward. And so I find that sometimes that's really helpful to look at what is the impact on your body. What has been the impact on your mind? What has been the impact on your relationships? Because this doesn't get talked about, but people get really self-absorbed when they're dieting and losing weight. And I don't say this to be mean. I just say it's what we see happening. We see this also in nutrition deprivation studies, where people really do get self-absorbed. So they're not even tuned into the body language, that people aren't really interested in hearing about your diet. And so just looking at what the impact has been, and why is this going to be any different? Because our biology has not changed. Your body is really trying to save your life every time it slows down its metabolism and gets you more focused on eating and so on. So looking at your own history, I think, can be helpful.
And I wrote that down. I'm writing down a lot of things. So impact on your body and your mind. And it reminds me, Evelyn, something that I heard in an interview that you were part of. And you said something that touched my heart so deeply because I see it with the clients, the women that I work with. And you said to watch. You didn't say it like this, but it was basically to watch the level of suffering that anything that you're doing. It was like a flashback of how many women, even me growing up, friends, my mom, the amount of suffering that can bring when you live in that constant preoccupation with what am I doing next to fix whatever I need to fix next. So when you said that, I'm like it makes me sad of how much things we do despite the suffering in this search of whatever the search is, right?
Right.
To say, just pay attention to the impact because that's part of health.
Absolutely. In fact, it's funny because, in today's conversation, I went straight into the research on this and that and this and that. And yet when I'm talking to a lot of individuals, I'll say, diet culture is a big root of suffering and intuitive eating is a 10-step path out of that suffering. And I don't ever get pushback on that. I get pushback on weight is health and all those things, but no one wants to suffer. So I at least will have someone's attention. And even if they're not ready to hear this right now, they'll remember that there's a path out of this suffering, that you don't have to be on this path. And, another source of suffering I'm seeing, and there's a lot more research now on all these studies showing weight cycling, that when you gain and lose the weight, it's not this innocuous process. They're seeing it now linked to all kinds of issues, including insulin resistance, inflammation, all the things that so-called weight loss is supposed to do. It's actually creating the very problem it's supposed to be solving, including impacting on the DNA level, inflammatory responses, and so on. But if we look at the suffering, and how much time in a day do you spend worrying or thinking about your body? And how much brain space would you be able to reclaim if that was, and that's the thing that gets me, I get this all the time, unsolicited emails and DMs, like, it changed my life, but I've got so much space now. I've had artists say that they've gone back to their art or whatever it happens to be because now they're not preoccupied all the time with all of this. We're talking about food noise. The food noise of diet culture is what really needs to be looked at,
Maybe it's designed on purpose to keep us all quiet, because can you imagine if we regain all that time and that motivation and all that empowerment as women, we'll conquer the world.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I was literally just going to say that. Like, they want us to be preoccupied with our bodies so that we can't change the world the way it should be changed.
Yeah. Keeps people silent, keeps them numb. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, Evelyn, I'm curious, I could just listen to you all day long, but I'm curious, do you think that intuitive eating can coexist with someone being on a GLP-1?
What a great question. Elise and I have been talking about this back and forth and back and forth. And, one of the things that we look at on the pros and the cons. So if someone's hunger is dampened and so is their fullness, then listening to hunger and fullness is not going to be too helpful or healthy for the body. However, with our last principle on your health with gentle nutrition, one of the things that we're really emphasizing in this new edition of intuitive eating coming out next year is the idea of sufficiency. That's one of the most important things. Are you getting enough to eat? Are you getting enough energy? And so someone who's currently on a GLP-1, and let's say they want to do intuitive eating. In fact, I've had people say, it seems less scary to do intuitive eating on the GLP-1. So we can certainly, because there's 10 principles, we can certainly be on the path of intuitive eating. But the first question we have to ask, especially as a dietitian, is, are you getting enough to eat? How do you know? And how do you feel about eating more than what you're currently eating to help, attenuate all of these problems? I think if we can answer that question, and if we can say, yes, I'm willing to eat an adequate amount of food, then there's not a problem. But if someone says, no, that's the reason why I'm on a GLP-1, I want to eat just, 2 peas at dinner and, 1 cornflake at breakfast, and I'm exaggerating, but kind of not because some of the stories, then that's somebody who is probably not ready. And my philosophy is this, that I'm always here. My door is always open if and when you're ready to do this work. And I will often share concerns I have if someone wants to stay in diet culture. And when you look at the rates of eating disorders really escalating, the last study I saw, it's like 1 in 3 people now. And I think it's going to be even higher. I know I even contacted the researchers to see if I was reading that right. So yeah, you got that right. So some big things. And is this how you want to be spending your life, in fear of the weight regain or in the obsession of the eating? And even if you're somebody right now who is effusing about, oh my God, I went out to dinner and I only had one bite of steak and one bite of my dessert and it was amazing. And you're talking, you're obsessing about, how much brain space is that taking up? What is that doing for the depth of your relationships and conversations with friends and loved ones and so on? Again, no shame, but these are things I would be looking at.
Yeah, just becoming aware of those things, right?
Yeah.
Simply having someone ask you the question and sitting back and thinking about it for a moment.
Yeah.
I know that I have a few clients who are very far along in their intuitive eating path and healing their relationship with food and their journey out of diet culture. And I'm thinking about 2 or 3 people specifically that have, through all of that process and all of the things, they ended up needing to go on GLP-1s for blood sugar purposes. Some of their markers just were not budging no matter what we tried. And they're very willing and want to eat enough food, but it is definitely a challenge because things don't sound good. Nothing sounds appealing.
Right.
It's hard. I can't relate. I've never had the experience, but I think it's hard to make yourself eat when you literally do not have an appetite or things make you feel nauseous. And it's a tricky situation to navigate.
Thinking about launching a podcast or taking yours to the next level? Juliana Barbati and her team are the experts you need. They take care of everything from episode funnel design to production and marketing, so you can focus on creating content that connects. Check out julianabarbati.com and mention that we sent you.
It is a really, really good point that when you don't have the experience, the presence of hunger, you don't have the motivation to seek food, let alone make food, get food, and all those other kinds of things. It's really rather profound. But that's actually a really good example of candidates for intuitive eating. If you're on a GLP-1 for managing your blood sugar, again, no issue with that because there is less of the side effects, more connection with the body and so on. And then when I start thinking about interoceptive awareness, which is to me the neuroscience of intuitive eating, interoceptive awareness being the ability to listen to physical sensations arising from your body, whether it's states like hunger, fullness, whether it's your heart racing, whether it's emotions, it picks up emotions. We have a powerful treasure trove of information to get our needs met, both biologically and psychologically. But if you're at war with your body, are you going to listen to that messenger, let alone respond? Are you going to trust that message, let alone respond? And I think when people say intuitive eating is life changing, I think in part it's because they're tapping in to this amazing interoceptive awareness that we have the ability to help guide our decisions with clarity,
It's amazing how that, obviously intuitive eating is largely in part rebuilding that self-trust between you and your hunger signals, messages from your body. But I can attest to that. I've had so many clients come back and tell me that intuitive eating just seeps out into so many other areas of their life that have absolutely nothing to do with food. And it really is because that self-trust comes out in so many other ways, right?
Yeah, it's huge. It's like a transferable skill. It's like cross-training for other kinds of things. It's really profound and grounding. Yeah.
Okay, so wait a minute. This is important. So we've talked about this before, Evelyn, obviously, but now I thought, wait a minute. If I have Evelyn herself in the show, I have a super basic question for you.
Okay.
Because when we started this podcast 3 years ago, I knew nothing about intuitive eating. What I know now, I've learned through Elizabeth, and it did change my life. Now I'm raising 2 girls, one teenager and one 10-year-old. And now I find myself saying like, okay, here's your plate of food. Remember, when you tune into your body, when you're hungry, when you're full, and when she gets a tummy ache, I'm like, okay, what might be your body telling you about maybe those 3 donuts you just had, right? Instead of punishing the food, which I did as I did before, right? So learning from Elizabeth, all these things have been great. Anyway, how would you define intuitive eating in the most simplest words that I could explain, for example, to my 15-year-old? What is intuitive eating? Plain to a 15-year-old.
I'm so glad you asked it that way because I will give different definitions depending who I'm talking to. So to a 15-year-old, and I love those groups.
Because by the way, Evelyn, I'm sure you're aware, I didn't know how teenagers are dealing with so much shame of their bodies and the pressure until I had the teenager. I
It's humbling. So to a teenager, I would say, you're the expert of your body. No one can be the boss of you. I like to tap into their rebel energy and then get them curious where they can ask me more questions. Well, what do you mean? Well, only you know what something feels like in your body. Only you know what hunger feels like. Only you know what satisfaction feels like. And one of my most favorite experiences with a group of teenagers, I was doing a group program at a residential facility for teens who had substance problems. And I came in, the therapist said, we have a situation here. We need you to help process. I go, the situation? What's going on? They said, well, we had a guest speaker that just came in and the kids are really upset. I think they'll explain it to you. I go, okay, let's hear it. So a psychologist had come in talking about brain health and how eating fast food is so horrible for you, quote, 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 and all the calories. You should know the calories. And they were pissed. He can't fucking tell me what to do. You don't count calories. And I was so taken aback by their sense of knowing and their empowerment and their outraged at someone telling them what to do. I said, wow, if this was like a class in school, first of all, you'd all pass and get an A plus. Like, I'm so all proud of you. And I hear the anger. Let's talk about what this is, and I'm trying to think how long this group was going on. It wasn't even a year-long group yet, in which they got this righteous anger. And so I think that's really powerful, especially in this age too, where we want our kids to really have the agency of their bodies and consent and all these things. It begins with some of these really basic things. So I'd like to share a little story. It's a really little one. My daughter texted this to me the night before Christmas. I have two grandkids, one's almost 6, the other one is 8. And they had a letter by Santa's Milk and Cookies. Dear Santa, you can eat as much of these as you like, but you don't have to eat all of them. I go, oh my God, it's intuitive eating for an 8-year-old,
Hey, Santa, have you heard of intuitive eating?
Yeah. So it's basically about you being the expert of your body, and to other people, I might say, it's a self-care eating framework rooted in the dignity and respect for all bodies. In this case, I intentionally use the word all because I mean all bodies. And we can get into the weeds with many other kinds of definitions. I was at a chef's table and I didn't know anyone there. There's like 10 people. And they asked me what intuitive eating is. And I said, and they were thinking, I don't want to be a buzzkill. And I was thinking, I help people connect with their bodies, enjoy eating. Oh, that's so good. They connected with that. And then I'll go more into deeper stuff if they have more questions around that. So there's many ways that we can describe intuitive eating. And the other thing I will also say is, and actually there's even more research now, there's like 325 studies. There's a standard assessment scale, even for preteens and teenagers and regular adults. And it's not the same thing as mindful eating. People get that mixed up. Even researchers get that mixed up. It's something different. Mindfulness is a great skill to have, but it doesn't have the same directives in terms of rejecting diet culture and respecting your body and those kinds of things. If we had a way to figure that out, it would take a really long time. So let them in on the secret to help with the suffering, to end the suffering,
So Evelyn, what would you say to the woman out there who feels terrible in her body right now? And she's worried about her health and she wants to feel better, but she really believes that weight loss is the only way.
So the first thing I would say is it's really understandable you'd have that belief because of the culture that we live in. I get that. And I also understand you want to feel better. And there are many ways that we can actually work on health that help you feel better. And we have to remember that mental health is just as important as physical health. And when we start focusing all of our energies on trying to change the size of our body, it really does affect our mental health. And if this hypothetical woman you're talking about, if they have a family, if they have kids, I like to offer the idea, wouldn't it be wonderful to break the legacy of diet culture in your family at your kitchen table? That's where we all have the power. When we talk about diet culture, it sounds so big and so out there. I was like, I don't know if I can change culture, but we have the power in our families, and that's the ripple effect,
I love that. I have a 5-year-old.
Oh,
he's so funny because, basically I've known Elizabeth his entire life. And so I've learned a lot about intuitive eating through her. When he doesn't want to eat, he'll be like, Mom, I am listening to my hunger cubes, but don't be asking me for snacks in 10 minutes. This is dinner.
Oh, I love it.
That is so funny. So if I may take a little bit of a pivot, because I feel it would be a missed opportunity to not ask you your thoughts, given that the new dietary guidelines just came out. And I would love to just sort of get the highlights of your take.
Well, I'm going to give you my first impression when I saw it. It's like, oh, that's upside down nutrition. I think it's a really good example of the influence of politics and other powers that be on policy. And I think because it's such a vivid example, I think it can help us remember that these kinds of guidelines are not free from the powers that be, in which there are conflict of interest and so on. It doesn't change the fact from an intuitive eating perspective, you can eat whatever food that you want to, you know? I think for a lot of people, it can feel really confusing. It's like, oh, I should switch to using butter. Should I have whole fat dairy as well? And, you know, it's one thing to have guidelines, but they should at least be based on a consensus of research. And that's not even happening. I don't even mind controversial guidelines, at least if it's based on some good research, but this is just based on some opinions from a department that is reducing vaccinations for kids. I think you keep that in mind. And, you know, I think about, I'm forgetting her last name. I'm just going to call her Dr. Jessica. She did a really good takedown on that if we step back, the dietary guidelines have never really been the problem because Americans aren't following them, you know, and some of the basics are still true. It's a good idea to eat fruits and vegetables. It's a good idea to eat whole grains. Nothing, I don't have an issue with that. But the other reaction I had, this is so long ago, if you could ever watch the Woody Allen movie called Sleeper, it's where everything, this guy wakes up from like, I forget how long he was under, and everything is opposite of what you thought it would be for health. It's just adding more confusion. It's adding more noise to the noise. All the more reason to be listening to your body. Your body. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with that completely. I do have one question that I want to end on, but before we get to it, Tara Maria, is there anything else that you really wanted to ask?
I mean, I could be here all day, but I'll rein myself in.
Okay. If I may be so bold as to ask you two questions. So one of them is just sort of how I would love to, a note I would love to end on. But another one, so I go in every year. They ask me to come and speak to the program where I did my master's degree about intuitive eating specifically and introduce it to students. And a question that I get every year that I would just love to see how you would answer the question is, well, what if someone has insulin resistance and it's impacting their hunger and satiety cues? Like, how can that fit with intuitive eating and the principles? And I'm just curious how you would answer it.
Yeah, I love all the what ifs kinds of questions. And one of the things I would start off with is, before even answering that, is we have to remember that we look at weight cycling studies, that it increases insulin resistance, increased new onset diabetes, you know? And so I would be looking at what is really going on. And are we looking at insulin resistance, or are we actually looking at somebody who has diabetes? Because I don't usually see that so much with insulin resistance as I do with somebody with a diagnosable, you know, diabetes. And it doesn't change the work of what intuitive eating is. I will add that because intuitive eating is an adaptive model, let's say someone does have diabetes, you can integrate medical nutrition therapy with diabetes. In fact, there's a book out on that now by Janice Dada, in Eating Without Guilt with Intuitive Eating with Diabetes, something along that line. Is actually really, really quite good. Yeah, it's really good. And what I find is, if someone's not too familiar with, actually, let me say this. So there's some really good research that's been out. So the people who don't understand intuitive eating, they haven't read the book, they haven't read the research, they will often have a criticism like, oh, if you let people eat whatever they want, they're going to be unhealthy. They're going to eat all the, you know, wrong foods and so on. And yet the research that's come out has shown the opposite. Intuitive eaters actually do pretty well. They have a pretty good quality diet. It either improves the quality or it stays neutral, but nowhere does it actually denigrate what is going on. And they tend to eat more fruits and vegetables. So there's a lot of research on that. And when people are not familiar with the model, they can't even imagine integrating it because they have some preconceived ideas. So I like to hear, what are some of the preconceived ideas? Let's take actually a clear idea, because I think part of me was resisting, you know, are they really not hearing hunger and fullness? But let's take something that's real clear. Somebody is on a medication like a stimulant because they have ADHD. They're not hungry in the morning and in the afternoon. Can you work with intuitive eating? Absolutely. But this is where we're going to use some medical nutrition therapy. We're going to look at, I never ask someone in this situation, what are they willing to eat for breakfast? Because just the word breakfast is threatening. That, would you be willing to have a snack in the morning? And how about a snack, you know, in the afternoon? So in this case, we are using kind of a self-care technique, but it's all within intuitive eating. Anyway, can you use intuitive eating? The answer was yes, and some people might need some adaptations, and it's completely fine. So I'm glad. And by the way, I always love working with students, and I say, keep the questions coming, One of the things I always like to say, it's an incredibly gratifying way to work with patients. I can't say the dietitians I've worked with that were on the verge of dropping out of the profession because they just weren't feeling good. And they discovered intuitive eating, started working in that model and going, oh my God, as opposed to working in a weight-centric model, endorsing weight loss and seeing it's not working, it doesn't feel good,
I agree with that completely. I don't know that I could ever go back into a non-intuitive eating or
it would hurt my soul,
Yeah.
That was my journey too. As a personal trainer, like, of course I started out in diet culture because that's all I knew. But like seeing people come in and being like, they're not losing weight, they're not achieving their goals. Like, what do we do? And their only goal is weight loss. Like at some point I was kind of like, all right, I'm not emphasizing that anymore. And I didn't even know there was a word for what I was doing. And then I was introduced to diet culture and weight neutrality. And I was like, this is what I do.
Great feeling.
Hey everyone, we want to give a shout out to the amazing photographer Casey Boss. She's a maternity and newborn photographer based in Maryland and does the most incredible work right in the comfort of your own home. Her sessions combine the cozy, safe feeling of being at home with the polished, professional look of a studio shoot, so you get gorgeous photos without the stress of leaving your house. We've actually worked with her ourselves. She took the photo you see on our podcast cover, and we can honestly say she's a joy to work with. So we've tried her personally and can vouch for how professional, talented, and thoughtful she is. If you're a new mom or you're expecting, this is the perfect way to capture those precious early moments with your baby. Check out her work at CaseyElainePhotos.com. That's CaseyElainePhotos.com and book your session with her. More info in our show notes.
I think once you see the harms of diet culture, you cannot unsee them. And
that's what it is, yeah.
See the possibilities of what life and how people's health and well-being can improve outside of it. You can't look away from that either.
Yeah.
So
absolutely
incredibly life-changing. Well, what gives you hope about the future of conversations around food, bodies, and health?
Well, first of all, you guys do. I mean, when I see a podcast like this focusing on this, it gives me hope. When I see so many certified intuitive eating counselors around the world, I think we're like in 65 countries now. That gives me hope because these are people who have spent, as you know, it takes a lot of time to do this training. Because they know. When I find when you've been in the trenches for long enough, at least like 5 years, and if you haven't been exposed to intuitive, it'll take at least 5 years, then it's like, there's got to be another way. And when they find this way, it's amazing. So that's what gives me big hope. And seeing now a new organization, the Association for Weight Inclusive and Size Medicine. These are doctors. It's only been around for about a year. Their dues are really quite reasonable. They have amazing education and training. It's from a physician perspective. That's something I'd encourage you to check out. That gives me great hope because a lot of diet culture and anti-fat bias is happening in medical school. I think about Dr. Gregory Dodell. He's an endocrinologist.
I interviewed him.
Oh, well, then you know. But he's told me it took him 10 years to come around. And that's because he's married to a psychologist who works in eating disorders, and she worked on him for 10 years. He said that his training in endocrinology was very, very anti-fat bias. But now look at where he's at, spreading the word, endorsing intuitive eating, health at every size. So that's what gives me hope. Like you said, once you see it, you can't unsee it. When you see the suffering, it'd be one thing if it was a pain in the ass to lose weight, but it really made a difference. I would have no issue. It's like, I think about celiac disease. My son was diagnosed when he was a toddler. He's now a grown adult. And it was a pain at the time. And yet, what it did for his quality of life, it was worth every bit of aspect. But we weren't restricting calories or those kinds of things. It was sustainable, not causing harm. That's the issue. Yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned that resource. I was not familiar with that. Is just for anyone listening, is that also a good place to go to find weight inclusive doctors?
I don't know. And I'll say this, I don't know if they have a list, but I think I would go there and look for sure.
I will go look and
isn't that funny? I don't have the answer to that question. I would imagine if they don't have a list, they'll have one in the near future.
Yeah.
That's amazing. It's one of the biggest questions I get is, okay, so where do I find?
Yeah. Now we have a great group of people, very science-based.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, Evelyn, thank you so much for everything you do everywhere and being so generous with your time and your knowledge and your wisdom. I love the ripple effects of this work and how it seeps out into all the people that I work with and the people that they interact. And, Maria's sharing her example. And, you really were like the original stone in the pond on that one with intuitive eating. So
I love that. I'm the original Rolling Stone.
Hey guys, it's Elizabeth. If you're tired of stressing about food, counting calories, or feeling guilty after eating, I've got something for you. I'm bringing back my wildly popular and free 5-day challenge called Discover Intuitive Eating, where I'll walk you through key steps to finding food and body peace. Over 5 days, you'll get simple, actionable tools to quiet food stress, enjoy your favorite foods guilt-free, yes, even ice cream or chips, to honor your hunger and fullness cues and begin making peace with your body just as it is. If you're ready to stop dieting and start living with intuitive, peaceful eating, sign up now with the link in the show notes at elizabethharrisnutrition.com/challenge26. Spots are free and open to everyone. We kick off live together the last week in January. See you on the inside.
Love it. And I always gather a few takeaways from the episode, and not always, as our listeners would be like, not always, Maria, but sometimes. And I gather a few today, if you don't mind. So this is the few of the things that I'm taking with me, and for you listening, hopefully that helps you gather or organize some of the ideas. So if you are intrigued or using GLP-1, a question that you can ask yourself is what really your purpose and your intention? What's going to happen as a result? What are your options? And how we encourage everyone to look for what is sustainable, not causing harm. We talked something that you said, Evelyn, that it touched my heart. Society is cruel for people in bodies, which is all of us, right? That's something so important to keep. We talked about relationships and how loneliness and isolation is the top leading indicator of death mortality when we've been distracted by so many other things. Maybe, we can focus on that. The impact, to be aware of whatever we do, what's the impact on our bodies, on our mind, on our emotions. Another important questions to ask ourselves: are you getting enough to eat? And the difference between being at war with your body versus tapping into that awareness and that self-trust. Because you, my dear listener, you are the expert of your body. Only you know what hunger feels like for you, what fullness feels like for you, and the importance of the dignity and respect for all bodies. We're here to talk about how to enjoy eating while staying away from suffering. Because when we focus all your energy on changing your body, that has an impact on your mental health. So, Evelyn, thank you.
Thank you. Very well said. Nice summary.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to leave people with that we didn't ask or you want to share?
I feel complete, actually. Very, very, very wonderful conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Super. Well, thank you again so much for being here with us.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you for listening. If you want to connect with me outside of this podcast, you can find me on Instagram at coaching_therapist.
I'm Elizabeth. You can find me at Elizabeth Harris Nutrition or in my Facebook group, Health and Healing with Intuitive Eating.
And I'm on Instagram and Facebook at Tara DeLeon Fitness. Guys, if you loved this episode or any of our other episodes, we would love it if you would leave us a review on Apple Podcast. It really, really helps us get the non-diet word out to the rest of the world. So please leave us a review.
Yes, thank you.